is Matthew Weinstock. I hail from Raleigh, North Carolina in the United States. And I'm the Director of Global SQA at Align Technology. Now, since I'm going to be talking to you about management today, I figured that you should know a little bit about me. So here's some pretty quick little facts. So one, the great outdoors. We spend 8 hours a day inside of our jobs, at least, right? Maybe you get 8 hours of sleep. I commute 2 hours a day, and I spend some time with your family. So spending time outside, hiking, trekking, doing anything, it's necessary evil. And this is actually a homecoming for me. My family actually immigrated from Belarus about 100 years ago. So I'm the first person actually to come back from my family, so pretty excited. And one thing that didn't come up here is that actually my love to travel. This is the 39th country that I've been to since 2009. I raised in a typical American family where we drove everywhere. And so I only got to see the East Coast of the United States. So as soon as I graduated from university, I was off. But enough about that. Let's start talking about remote test teams. All right, so everyone in the audience, who here works remotely for a team? What about in a regional office for a multinational company? Okay, good. I'd hope so, being at a remote testing. So about 15 years ago, when I started testing, the world was not like this. I actually lived in Boston, Massachusetts, up on the East Coast near New York, and I was an SDET. My team also had another team in Bangalore, India. Never talked to them once. That's just how the work was done. Today, part of my team spreads 4 time zones, 3 countries, and 2 companies. We have about 30 people on my team. That's really small for some people, some organizations, but trying to coordinate that can be really difficult. And why is that? Let's talk. Time zones, okay? Right now, we are +8 from where I live. Imagine trying to schedule a meeting with people who are also behind me in California. That's +11 for them. It becomes really difficult. How about you get on a call and you're trying to turn on your webcam, but your bandwidth is too low and you notice that people's faces freeze? That can be a little difficult, right? So not to mention as well that every one of you in here, English is probably not your first language. So I have to appreciate the fact that you are able to understand me and speak my language for me. But let's talk about teams in the future. So today, companies are going to a round-the-clock or around-the-world kind of style, follow the sun, where they have teams everywhere. So you could have a team in the Philippines, you could have a team in Moscow like I do, you could be in Spain, United States, everywhere. That way you can constantly be doing work. So people always are going to be remote from you, right? Your manager might be remote, people might be remote from your team. But how about this? The last company I worked for is a Fortune 500 company, actually. And they have a huge office in New York, but they're rebuilding it. And what are they doing? They've taken out half the desks because they expect half the people are going to work remotely. And also, those desks, they're not your home. It's called hot desking. You bring your laptop, you plug in, do your work, go home. Take that laptop with you. Someone else will have that desk the next day. So to really understand remote testing, I want to tell you a story that's loosely based upon my life and some other people's lives. So I want you to meet Timmy, the test lead. Timmy is an exceptional tester. He's part of a Scrum team. It's all co-located with him, let's say in Raleigh, North Carolina, because that's where I'm from. It's not me, though, I promise. Timmy's testers are also with him in Raleigh. So if they need mentoring or coaching, they're right there with him. Very, very easy for him to do. His team was excelling. They're doing awesome. And for that, Timmy got promoted. He's now Tim, the test manager. This was great. Like, everybody wants to be promoted. Everybody wants that higher job, right? Except suddenly, Tim's world came crashing down. He now had testers who reported to him all over the world, not just in Raleigh. He had never met most of these people. He had no idea what their lives were like. How am I going to manage and coach people if I've never met them? I've never seen their face. So Timmy went home, and just like everyone else, he Googled. He Googled his brains out, okay, just trying to find the answer. And if you Google, how do I manage a remote team? The results are endless, okay? Tim, not unlike everyone else who gets promoted, and I've heard some other presentations here today, a lot of times you move up through the ladder, but you don't have the training for it. You're thrust into that new position, right? You go from senior engineer to lead, and now you have a team. What am I supposed to do with that? So Tim kept Googling until his eyes just started getting a little blurry. And then he suddenly felt this hand reach out and pull him into the machine. So Tim woke up in this dark electronic world. And out of the darkness came a messenger whose name is Slackbot. Tim, you must learn to trust yourself before the others will trust you. You must find the 4 oracles who will show you the way of how to manage remote teams. And with that, Slackbot disappeared, and Tim set on his way to find the 4 oracles. So why is trust so important? Okay, so these pyramids here are from the 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, which is a book by Patrick Lencioni. As you can see, we really want to be on this left-hand pyramid here. If we have trust as the basis, then everything else becomes easy. But if we're dysfunctional, if we don't have trust, we can't get anywhere. So take, for example, if you don't trust one another in your team, how are you going to give critical feedback, constructive feedback, anything? Because are you afraid to say, hey, you could do a better job with that test, but the person might come back and say, get really mad, and you feel like you just got stabbed in the back. We don't want that, right? We want the team to be cohesive. So we need to go on the left side. So of the 4 oracles that we're going to meet today, we have the oracle of communication, leadership, culture, and tooling. Each of these areas are very important, but not important enough on their own. They need to be combined together. So Timmy's walking, and he comes up to this building. It's a very drab, boring-looking building, covered in wires and satellite dishes, and someone had graffitied on the side of the wall, communication. I bet you there's someone in there that I need to go talk to. So Timmy walks in, and he's all of a sudden immersed in this world where he can see all these people, and he can hear only half of them. He didn't understand where he was. Suddenly, this figure turns around in his swivel chair. Hello, Tim. I am WebEx, the oracle of communication. So, communication, why is it important? So, if we don't communicate the right way, it costs a lot of money. This was from research done in 2011. $37 billion the world lost in bad communication alone. That's a lot of money, right? And these are like Fortune 50 companies. They lost almost over $62 million per year because they lost productivity because of bad communication. So we really want to do our best to figure out how we can be clear with each other. And you see on the far right there, if we do have good communication, companies are, year over year have 47% higher returns on investment. So let's talk about the Moravian model. Like I said before, most of you are not native English speakers. So you are understanding the words portion. Moravian says only 7% of what I say is how you're going to interpret it. That's kind of crazy, right? Well, it's true. So let's imagine you're remote from your team, and I have some feedback for you. But you can't see me, though, okay? So just pretend that. Looking down. That was a great test. I mean, you just tested. You got all the coverage. If I could see that, I could tell that I was being sarcastic. That was not a good job at all, okay? My tone was off. I really mean body language, right? But if you can't see that, how can you tell? Or the fact that if English is not your first language, you're just trying to keep up, right? So we got to be careful. So this applies to everyone about we got to be careful what we say and how we say it. Now, that being said, we got to be really careful about people's time, okay? So I was on another session just a few minutes before, and they talked about agendas. How many of you have been to a meeting with 50 people, and there was no agenda set, and you have no idea why you've been there? Probably a lot of you. At least my team that's here, they know about that. First of all, 50 people don't need to be on that call. It is really hard for a remote team to be able to communicate together over WebEx or any other tool that's like it. Just it allows for one person to speak at a time. If two people speak, you're just not going to understand it, okay? So lower the number of people in your meetings and set an agenda so they know if they need to be there. And of course, time zones are important, guys. Even myself, having a company that's headquartered in California, they're not considered all the time of my time. And I get scheduled for meetings between 5 and 6 p.m., which is when I need to go pick up my kids. That's pretty rude time for me, and I just don't appreciate that. And I give everyone credit who shifts their schedule for us on the East Coast and the United States. So all these things in their approach, right, to managing remote teams they're really important. But the last one that nobody really talks about is safety. It's actually psychological safety. I kind of hit on this before with our risk-taking, right? If you are afraid to be able to say something, you're not going to get anywhere, right? The 5 dysfunctions of a team. This is from the Google Rework study. And they said to unlock your team's potential, you need to have psychological safety. Teams need to feel comfortable with each other, need to trust one another, right? So you have to be able to give good feedback during that time. But once you unlock that psychological safety, all these other things will come. All right, so Webby's finishing up talking about communication when he starts going on and on about how he's going to pirate the Champions League final when suddenly his bandwidth drops and his face freezes in the strangest pose. Tim didn't know what to do, so he slowly backed away, I'm out of here, and moved on. So Tim's walking and he figures, man, I got this. I never have turned on my webcam, never had to do it. I'm going to actually set a good example for my team. When suddenly he trips on a rock, picks himself up, dusts himself off his face. Nobody likes dirt in their face. And he realizes he's in front of a cave. And he's coming face to face with a being whose eyes glow red. And Tim trembled with fear when he realized it's just a friendly little octocat. He said, hi, Tim. I am the Oracle of Digital Leadership. We have a lot to cover today, but you should always remember that as a leader, you are here to support your team's goals and not the other way around, which is a basis for servant leadership. So as servant leaders, we need to set the example for our team to unlock everything for them to be able to be successful. Some of that starts with being persistent. If your testers are waiting for things from PMs, a PM who's in a different office, you need to find a way to be able to get through to them, right? Or for our Agile folk, or for POs, right? Sometimes they're really unresponsive. I'm going to continue to get the results that my team needs. I'm going to hold myself accountable. If I do all of this, it's more likely that my team is going to do the same for me in return. They're going to become more successful. And as you do that, you're continuing to mentor them and showing them the way, because this is only going to allow them to rise faster through the organization and allow them to be our next leaders. Okay, this is one of my favorite ones. Who has a one-on-one with a manager that's not local to you? Okay, just about one-on-ones in general. Okay, most. So first, you guys should ask your managers for one-on-one, always. That time is for you. Now, of those people who have one-on-ones, how many of you think it's like a status report where you're just told what you've just been working on? Wow, I'm impressed. You know, most people say usually at the status report, I did this project, I did this, blah, blah. It tends to happen. We tend to kind of fall down in that way. So what we need to realize is that one-on-ones are crucial. They always need to be there. And this is perfect FaceTime. Turn on your camera. This is a great conversation to have at any time. And when this is a good time to discuss goals as well, right? How am I growing? What do I need to do next? Now, I subscribe to the 3-2-1 goal mentality. 3 goals that support the company, 2 goals that support my values, 2 personal goals, and 1 goal that supports the company value. So I have a little story about a team that I inherited at my last company. My boss gave me this team because they were okay with going out with their automation at 60% fail rate. Okay? So only 40% of their tests would pass every time. But they're like, oh, we'll just do a diff and see if the fails are the same. And that's not really great because we don't actually know the underlying failure. But they were okay with this. And so I talked to the lead who reported to me and said, Why? Why are we doing this? Well, we don't have the technology right now to be able to handle this, right? We're using Selenium, but we need to learn how to use Protractor because we migrated to Angular. Okay, so what do? We set up 2 goals, right? One goal, support the company. We want to get to 0% fail rate, right? Only fail when we actually fail. And the other goal was to learn how to implement the new technology, which is now the personal goal, because they can take that with them if they ever decide to leave the company. He was pretty excited about that. It was a goal that he actually wanted to achieve. It wasn't about necessarily a project, but it supported all of our needs. Well, guess what? 5 months later, 0% fail rate. Only failed on those. And they were excited, and they wanted to bring in other new tech. So it just kept going and going. Okay, now, we've talked about communication. This is a chart from the Harvard Business Review. So we said communication in general, 69% of managers are uncomfortable communicating. Oh, that's really tough when we're dealing with remote teams. So we know that's rough. But then the second one is giving direct feedback or criticism. Well, to be able to grow, we need to be able to give feedback, right? And during those one-on-ones, that's the perfect time to be able to do that. So has anyone ever gotten to their performance review and been surprised by it? You don't have to raise your hand, that's okay if you didn't, but there have been times where people are like, I didn't know that my manager thought that of me. Well, why is that? We didn't have feedback sessions. We didn't collect feedback from our peers. So we want to be proactive. We want to be constantly asking other testers, developers, POs, Scrum Masters, whomever, for this proactive feedback, right? We want to ask them. We want to gain this feedback. What do you think we could have done better, right? What could I have done better? Could I have approached this a different way? If you solicit that feedback, you'll learn. If you wait for it, though, usually it's going to become the opposite, and you're going to be surprised by it. It's not fun. Now, I'm talking about this now, and people tend to forget sometimes how to give feedback. They tend to go to the destructive feedback. That's the feedback you don't really want. That's when you're down in the dumps because someone just totally ripped you a new one. We don't want that. Okay? Even if it's a negative thing, it's constructive feedback. So I want to tell a story. There's a feedback loop method called radical candor. It's caring personally and challenging directly. So you really get to know who works for you, right? Get to know them personally. But then when they have an issue, you can tell them straight up, right in the face, right? So the author, she was with her manager, and they went to this big meeting with the C-levels, right? So the top of the top. And she thought she did an awesome job. She got exactly what she needed out of it. They're all clapping. They're happy. Hooray. So she and her manager come out of that meeting, and he's like, great job, great job. She's like, I know. She's like, but next time, we can do even better. What do you mean, do better? I just did awesome. I just got a round of applause from the C-levels. Well, you were saying after every sentence, or you started with it. So you started, and you could tell it felt a little unprofessional to them. So how can we make you come off as the top of the top? So we're going to get you some training so you can get better. Now, if I was been told that and I didn't have a good relationship with my boss, that probably would have been pretty insulting, right? That would have hurt my feelings, because people get a little paranoid about things like that. Not when you care personally, right? And it was constructive. It was in a good way. I liked the feedback. Now, since we're at a test conference, let's talk about some actual feedback styles for test. Now, if you're working with a developer who happens to be remote from you, we work with a lot of them at my company. Some are in India, some are in Moscow, others are in California. So having that first-time quality for both development code and automation code or tests is really important. How many of you have experienced, let's say, writing a test, and the developer is in a different time zone, and they say they're done with their work? It's your morning, you come on, and you log into the website or whatever, your app, and a 500's out immediately. Now you have to wait till the next time that developer comes on so they can look at it. You just wasted an entire day, right? Same can be said for our tests, right? If our audit tests are bad or if we're not testing the right things, it can change real quick. So we want to make sure with working with remote teams that we take a little bit extra time to make sure what we're producing is really, really good. And that can be said, like the sitting with developers is a new thing for, we're starting with my team, is that even though you're remote, you come together, the developer can walk you through the code so you understand what their mindset was. Because then you can realize, well, the user story says this, but you're doing this, why? You might uncover things sooner, so you don't have to have that back and forth. You can have a good conversation like a normal human being. All right, so Tim thanked Octokent, and he moved on his way. He's like, oh, I feel like I'm so much stronger. I understand. I'm going to be able to give good feedback. When he's walking, and the grass suddenly turned to sand, and he's in the middle of a desert. 2 pythons came hissing out. Their eyes started swirling. Put Tim into a trance. Said, Tim, we are the pythons. Only until you understand your people's hearts and minds will you be able to trust you. So we're talking about culture here, guys, right? People's minds and hearts and minds, where they live, where they're from. A lot of people think that culture is strictly your office life. I can tell you that's wrong. First of all, the people. I encourage my team constantly, who are not with me, because nobody's with me, unfortunately, to go home at a certain time, right? If they're on really late, so it's like 12 o'clock for me, it's 8 p.m. in Moscow. Go home, okay? You guys need to have a good work-life balance. You need to encourage this in your teams. Places. What I say in the United States, if I use some slang word, might not mean the same thing to you here in Minsk, right? I have to be careful with my words. Either you won't understand me or you might be offended. So I'm going to choose my words carefully. And of course, office life. Again, back to my company, how the office works in San Jose, California, Raleigh, North Carolina, they're really different. They're in the same country. They're super, I don't know, crazy, really neurotic. In California and in Raleigh, we're really laid back. It's really quiet. It's really chill. So you have to understand that culture is a mix of things, not just whom you are. Now, this might be hard for you guys to read, but this is the Lewis model. Okay, this talks about different countries and their actual cultures. So I want to point out, we'll do 3 different ones, because they're all over the place, and these are the ones that I work with. So you can see down here, here's the US. It says that we are linear active. So we are cool, factual, and decisive planners. Okay, I'll give it to you. That sounds pretty good. But how about, let's talk about Russia. Russia's way up at the top, second one on the left side, near multi-active. Multi-active, you're warm, emotional, and somewhat impulsive. Do you think that feels like you? You know, yes, this doesn't always fit everyone, but it's true. The last one let's talk about is India. A lot of people have teams in India, or even the Philippines here. So India falls right in between multi-active and reactive. So they're warm, emotional, but also accommodating and good listeners. It's interesting to think about what kind of culture you might be approaching and how you may have to talk to them differently or handle them differently. Now, team building. You say, how the heck do I do team building when the team is not close to me? Well, I've done a lot of fun team building with teams all over the world. One that's very easy is if you have something like Slack or Teams, you can create a channel just for asynchronous talking. So anytime, people can see it. GIFs, vacation pictures, jokes, whatever. You can do anything in there, right? We had a really great time in my last place. We'd be laughing so hard sometimes from some of the stuff that they'd send over, and we'd have to stop for a moment. But then, how about online video games? Once a month, all the offices had Xboxes, so my team would get on, put on the headsets, and we play either a first-person shooter or a racing game, and we trash talk each other the entire time, just having a ton of fun, right? But we set that time aside in the right time zone, right? So thinking about time zones, because we had people in Kiev, and in Cape Town, South Africa, and in New York, and in Raleigh. So we're just trying to figure that out, and we had a lot of fun, right? It built up the team's rapport. Additionally, you have the book club. The book club is great. We read testing books, we read leadership books, all across the world, so you got different viewpoints. People thought different things when they read the same material. But it opened you up to the other people. They say, wow, I would have never thought of that, just because of where they're from. Okay, this one is one of my absolute favorite things. This is a user guide. This is something that when I started a new company, I tell my team, please do this, because I want to learn about you. Okay, so your style, what you value, things like that. But what I find is the most important is this one, how to best communicate with me. Okay? I am extremely outgoing. Okay? I'll talk to anyone. I'll try to figure out the language.
Всеми мне очень легко со всеми разговаривать. Но некоторые люди, которые со мной когда-то работали, они предпочитали говорить со мной лицом к лицу. Но когда я впервые кого-то видел и старался поговорить с кем-то по видео, я чувствовал...
Flipped. So they don't want face-to-face. They want to communicate during email. It's really, really easy for them. All right. Core values. What do people value? There's a lot of values here, right? Well, you can ask your team. Say, hey, what are your 5, 10 most valuable things? These are mine, right? So you can see how you and your team overlap. What is valuable to me may not be valuable to you. So it's always interesting to find out. All right, and then of course, pair programming. I've done this as a young SDET. I learned a lot from my team overseas. Most people think pair programming is a joke. It's not. Look at the stats, guys. 96% of people actually prefer to program together than they do apart. And actually 95% of them are more confident with their solution. That's great. So if you have something really difficult, you can find a way to do it. But also you're building rapport, right? You may put 2 different SDETs together or 2 manual engineers together or even a manual engineer who's trying to become an SDET. They'll learn a lot quicker this way. And you're building camaraderie between the teams. It's a great thing. And then lastly for this section, definition of done. And this is an office thing. How many people have thought of developers having a different definition of done than us in SQA? Let's give it a good example again. Developer has written their code. They've committed it. They said that it will be deployed. You come on the next day in a different time zone. It's not there. What happened? Oh, I thought just committing the code was enough. I changed the status in Jira. Wow, again, I lost time. This is, again, first time quality. Coming to understand what it actually means. From SQA, there's a code review, there's unit tests, it's been deployed, right? And did you smoke test it? Because I don't want to go in there and have it just blow up in my face. That's a waste of my time. Let's work together. So the Pythons disappeared. Tim exited his trance, said, wow, I had no idea. Like, I've lived in the US my whole life, and I barely knew that the cultures could be so different. So Tim's walking, and he's like, okay, I've met 3, there's 4. But he's thinking to himself, how the heck am I going to get home? I have no idea where I am. So he walks, and he walks, and he walks. He's still walking. Oh my God. Finally, he trips again. Man, I am so clumsy. And he looks up. He tripped on a giant spaceship's foot. As he approaches, door opens. 2 figures appear. A ramp slowly starts to descend when it suddenly jars to a halt. Morty, what did you do? Use the tools, Rick. Not the spaceship tools, I bet. So guys, it's all about using the right tools now. I know a lot of companies have not really come into the 21st century here and started using online tools. You may be still using like Excel documents that you have to check in and check out of SharePoint or something similar. So let's bring ourselves to the future, right? So let's talk about communication devices, allow for asynchronous conversation, things for video chat. How about G Suite, right? So you can have documentation in place that people can edit at the same time. And then journaling. Journaling is great when you have test teams around the world. You can actually write about maybe something you're experimenting with, right? It doesn't have to be a status report. You say, hey, I'm working on refactoring something in our automation framework. Here's where I got stuck, so somebody else could move on. Automating everything you possibly can, including emails, right? So if you're getting any results from any runs or from changes in your bug tracking system, making sure it's the right emails though, right? The right information at the right time. And of course, recording trainings. If you recorded trainings, that doesn't mean that you don't have to be there to give it. Now you should be there to support, but allow teams to start working on their own. Now, there's a ton of tools out there, right? And these are just a handful of them that I've used or am using currently. They all can be really great, or they can all be really bad for you. Because if you use them incorrectly, you may get stuck, okay? The biggest thing here is you want to be transparent, okay? If you can see what is going on and it's very easy, very quickly, your world is going to be so much easier. You don't have to wait for people to come online, okay? So there's like a great test tool that we just started using at our company called TM4J, Test Management for Jira. This actually allows us to attach our tests to a user story. So now, anybody can see this latest run, if it's red, green, orange if it's in progress, blue if it's blocked. You didn't have that transparency before. They'd always be like, SQA, where are you at? Right? And it'd be someone on California asking someone in Moscow. Well, now you don't have to wait for us, right? Plus the fact that our tool was really bad before that. And then, of course, dashboarding as well. So knowing where your items are, if they're done, if you move them in the right status, all these things make it a lot easier for people all around the world to check in at any given time. So lastly, your test setups matter, okay? So if you have a really difficult time to get your framework up and running or access to it, imagine someone who's in a different office trying to do that. I've run into this before, and we've actually had to bring those people to those offices so we get it set up. How much time do you think we've wasted because it wasn't very easy to get someone access to the framework, right? So again, it's all about transparency, okay? Get your SQA tools into the CI pipelines, right? So they can see performance tests, they can see any auto tests, all those things that are in there. Anything's going to save you time and make it transparent so that you are no longer the single point of contact. So Tim, finally learning everything, meeting all 4 oracles, he figured, you know what? I can do anything. So he climbed up into that spaceship, he pressed the big red button, and it took off in outer space. Guess what? He can't do everything still, and he blacked out while he's flying into space, and suddenly he woke up. Scratched his head with his computer making some horrible noise. He says, was that real? Or did I dream that? So Tim, with all of his newfound knowledge, went into work the next day, super charismatic, said, I can do anything. And over time, Tim's team became the most transparent, accountable, and efficient teams out there. And you know, he became the cool guy to work for too. So, meanwhile, back in Tim's machine, the oracles had all gathered and said, it's great that Tim has earned the trust of his team. Too bad he trusts applications he doesn't know. And? All right. Thank you.
Есть у кого-то вопрос?
Does anyone have any questions?
Thank you for your speech. Yes, English, no problem. I like the presentation. I'm a fan of Rick and Morty, so it was very cool.
Thank you.
Okay, I have one question about the conflicts between 2 teams which have, for example, from different time zones. So, do you have any examples how you resolve these conflicts? Thank you in advance.
Yes. So it kind of goes back to normally what teams value, right? So why is it those teams are having a conflict in the first place? So there have been tools listed today in other presentations, a root cause analysis even, right? Or maybe it's a breakdown in communication. Why one team demanding something else from another team? Understanding why they're conflicting in the first place is the only way we're going to solve it, right? If there's something that we are not providing for that team, it could be anything, right? There have been many teams in my past who have done this before, and normally it's because they're not supported well, right? And they don't understand this. It's a culture that happens in a lot of companies, and teams are competing against one another. We have to get to a point where we understand we are one organization, all trying to achieve the same goal. If we can get away from being independent all the time, we will do that. But so if, say they need something from you, you can get something from them in return. It's like a quid pro quo. Quid pro quo. There you go. Does that answer your question?
Матью, добрый день.
Good afternoon, Matthew. Thank you for your presentation. I would like to ask you the following. We used to have an experience and practice when development was performed in several countries. For instance, we had experience of cooperating with an Italian company, and a barrier which we had was related to the difference in tools applied by our team and their team. We didn't have the common unified instruments. For instance, we used Jira for bug tracking, while they used their own self-written tracker called Platon. And that team told us we were not going to use Jira, and we told them we are not going to use in your system, and please put your bugs here. In return, we used to have instructions and manuals that the testers first create the bug logs in our environment, then we transfer it to their site, including translating it to English. But we had even different mother languages. We spoke Russian there, and my language was Italian. And very often, when the tools are mixed and we could not find the common points, all of this led to the communication failures and gaps. I would like to ask you if you ever had similar problems and what solutions did you find to them? Thank you.
I have actually had a similar problem in the past. So I worked for a company that acquired companies from all over. At one point, there was 6 companies who had come together, so we had 6 defect tracking systems. It was a lot to handle. And depending on what product you worked on, it was just a mess. Like, there'd be bugs everywhere, you duplicating effort, right? So what we found, which unfortunately you guys have not been able to do yet, was that we were able to merge a lot of those, right? We had someone higher up at some point just has to say, enough. If we're going to be efficient, then the decision has to be made about one tool, right? If we continue to support multiple tools, we're wasting multiple people's time and effort. And the fact that different languages and different approaches, that's even harder. So it's always going to be difficult for you to be able to gain any speed by doing that. So what you could do, again, is it's going back to the transparency option, is finding a way to be able to get that information between the teams, right? And is it a stand-up type of information, right? Is it a dashboard? Somewhere where you can share that information, because until someone says otherwise, you're going to be fighting it. And because teams are very strong-willed when they believe in something, but until someone who's stronger says do it otherwise, you're most likely, unfortunately, going to be stuck. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
So from my experience, thank you for the talk. From my experience, remote teams, they are always less efficient than local teams. And do you see it possible that remote teams could be more efficient than local teams? And if yes, then why?
So I don't believe, actually, that remote teams, when you're split, so let's take an example, like a Scrum team. I'll use our company for example. We have people in California who are working with people in India. That's, right now, an 11.5-hour time difference. And so you're always waiting for something. So my experience and what I've done in the past is trying to co-locate teams as much as possible. So what you do, right, so you bring your devs in, your SQA in, and you try to pair them. And then after that, to keep communication amongst those teams, you have something like a Scrum of Scrums, or just a stand-up from one member, one leader of that team, or a dev and an SQA together. That way, you don't have to worry about those time zones as much. You are planning for one meeting a week or 2 weeks to be able to get everyone in sync. And if your information is transparent anyways, it becomes less of a hurt. And then you're speaking the same language, and it's a heck of a lot easier.
Okay, so as you see, the most efficient way is when each team, they kind of separated, and they just have some synchronization in between. Okay. Thank you.
Добрый день.
Good afternoon. Thank you for your presentation. Do the teams in your practice always use lingua frame in the English language? Have you ever had experience when you used Russian as the common language for communication? Because based on your experience, if I understand that correctly, all your teams use English as the communication means. Is that right?
Use English for across the board because we're spread across 3 different countries at this moment. But if you do be able to get the efficiencies together by co-locating, our teams, let's say in Moscow, they have their own channels and they're speaking in Russian that way. And so what they would do then is then bring that information forward because it's much more comfortable for them to be able to speak in their native language. Now, I'm using English as an example. I do know of companies as well that use other languages as well as their main source of communication. And so it is possible, too, that you have places around the world that will learn Russian, and it's their second language. And so then you're going to run into the same problems that I do, is that you have to be careful that for them, they're trying to make sure that they just understand, and we get back to the tone and the body language, right? And more than just words at points, but and them just trying to keep up, and that knowing that that's secondary for them as well. But the same problems are going to persist, whether it's no matter what is your primary language, someone else is going to be having to have that as their secondary language.
Спасибо всем большое.